Two, three. Hello, what an exciting day this is as we premiere our very first The 22nd Row podcast with Jim McKay and Gary the Arena Guy. This is an audio version of the famous 22nd Row project that Jim McKay took on and started, gosh, a long time ago. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. But before we get into all these details, I have to bring in the main reason that we are doing this podcast here today, and that is Jim McKay. Jim, what an exciting day this is, our first podcast.
Well, it is. Thank you, Gary. And this really wouldn't be happening if it weren't for you. You know, I'm someone who procrastinates for years to do something. So I think it's just a nice reflection of the fact we have these conversations and the fact that we thought we should share these conversations, which we enjoy so much. And
I think so too. And I think actually you and I have been doing podcasts together for like 25 years, except we were doing it before there was a term called podcast, and we did them in the form of what is formally called a conversation.
Oh, yes, exactly.
And we would do exactly this on the phone for hours at a time.
Exactly. And you know, we didn't end up hating each other or trying to get us canceled from Facebook or whatever, all these things, you know. And it is remarkable. And here, you know, we've known each other, golly, I think we're going on 25 or 30 years, somewhere in there. I've lost track.
I know, me too.
And
so let's start laying some groundwork before we talk about our main topic today, which is the 40th anniversary of the Fox. And a lot of great information there. And I think it's maybe, unfortunately, kind of a forgotten album. We can talk more about coming up. But let's talk about the 22nd Row, how it originated, how it originated, and a little bit of history of the 22nd Row, which you were instrumental in making it happen. Well, and really innovative for its time.
Well, it was. Thank you, Gary. And, you know, and part of this goes to back when you and I both worked for the same organization, which was the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And back in the early 1990s, the web was not as we know it today. The internet was not as we know it today. In fact, we referred to it as hypermedia. And my background is in fine arts and is as an architect, actually, in teaching architecture and teaching fine arts and critical theory in the arts. And so hopefully this won't get too jargony, but the idea that people could do things with the web that were beyond scientific was something that was questionable. And so in fact, some of my research was simply whether people really would want to use a mouse with a computer. That was the status of things at that time. And if you wanted to talk to other researchers, you would get on a computer. There were things called Usenet groups and discuss things like solid state physics, nuclear physics, things like that. And some few hobbies. They had a few music discussion groups, but the internet was not like it was today. And in fact, thanks to the Annenberg Foundation and some other grant organizations at the University of Illinois, we got a grant to research how what became the web was not even called that. It was called hypermedia, would be used possibly for entertainment or for the arts. It was a question. Shockingly, would people use it to what we call stream video? Would people use it to discuss arts? Could we have videos about how to make music or cook, for that matter, or anything? How would that work? So it's so rudimentary and almost absurd from today's perspective. It is absurd from today's perspective. But
well, it's just evolved so much, but it was very innovative for its time.
It was. And in fact, the website at the University of Illinois was the #1 website in the world in the mid 1990s, which is hard to believe. But because they had this thing called a browser, Mosaic, it was the basis for all the other browsers that came out. That's where you got it. And that's where it got picked up on. So it was really, you know, it sounds quaint, but it was very innovative at the time. And I did not invent the internet. But
that was Al Gore, wasn't it?
It was, and he did invent it. Or more seriously, he actually did. What he did say was that he was very interested in the internet, and he did visit the University of Illinois as a senator quite a bit. And so he really genuinely was interested in the internet when other people weren't. But it was this whole idea of how will we use the internet for the humanities. So things like QuickTime was a top secret project, for example. We've heard of QuickTime from Apple, maybe for video streaming on Apple devices. And they had a little couch potato icon, and they you could show a 30-second clip. That was innovative, but maybe getting too jargony here, but to cut to the chase, we had a pet project in our research lab, which was to take the complete works of the French philosopher Emile Durkheim. Now,
Wow.
if you don't know about Emile Durkheim, his biggest work was a work called Suicide, and he is so cheerful. His disposition makes Albert Camus look like a party animal. Okay, it's pretty depressing stuff. And this whole idea that you would create something where you could search for keywords, hypertext, and link to different documents, just like we click on links to study his great work, Suicide. Well, needless to say, this was pretty dry for me as one of the administrators and researchers in the group. So on the side, where we'd have Friday afternoon discussion groups, my prototype was to study Elton John. I had 2 or 3 prototypes, and one of them was on Elton John and Bernie Taupin. And so there were certain things we did as prototypes that were not for audience of millions or billions of people as the internet is today, but for maybe a few dozen, perhaps hundreds of people who were at other universities, at research institutions, large corporations on the scale of IBM, and for defense agencies. And so, yeah, these things were, this was a little side project. There was something called Usenet I referred to, which was where you would type commands and read about different topics. And again, recreational topics did include some music. I know the Grateful Dead had enough of a following that they had their own group, but Elton John did not, and many artists did not. And so you had to prove interest in that before you could move on to having its own separate text-only group. And I should point out that all of this was not for profit, okay? So you didn't have things like cookies. If you had an advertisement, you generally would be kicked off the internet if you put an advertisement.
Right.
I remember
It's supposed to have a little bit of an educational tone too, didn't it?
it was totally educational. That was
Yeah.
my thrust on it. In fact,
Yeah.
I'll explain that was part of the justification I had for doing this, because I was supposed to be doing something of higher education learning. So it was a music appreciation form is what I was creating. And that explains how we have get ahead of myself. I'll get there in a second. But yeah, if you sent someone email that was saying, here, buy my Girl Scout cookies, you would say, no, if you want to keep sending me advertisements, you're going to have to pay me $1 from now on, or we'll have you kicked off the internet. That's how it was. So we started a discussion group that was simply a very cryptic internet address ending in Elton John, because it was the topic, not because we branded ourselves as such. It was simply the topic. If we were discussing, socks, or discussing cars, or Elton John, it would just simply have the name, and we housed it at the University of Illinois. In fact, the idea was that there would not be any other websites, or websites didn't barely even exist. In fact, when we started this, there wouldn't be any other site or area for topic. This would be the place. And of course, today we have tens of thousands of sites just on Elton John, or so it seems,
Yeah.
So with that involved, I started doing that as an email list of collecting of probably about 40 or 50 people, and we emailed each other about topics. I remember our first official day was the same day The One came out on June 23rd, 1992. And it became apparent that I had some programming weaknesses in terms of computer programming. You needed a computer programmer, and a particular student by the name of Dan Blanchard at the university was interested in Elton John. He had already gotten the attention of Brian May from Queen for his helping set up a forum for Queen. And so he became very interested, and he was my technical partner in crime, so to speak. And he was a big help with that. And, he probably would have died in certain ways if he had not done this. So the two of us made a good pair, and we complemented each other quite well. And so Dan was a great programmer and took care of a lot of the technical things, while to the table, I brought this whole pretense of music appreciation, specifically directed towards the music of Elton John and Bernie Taupin. And let's keep this in mind. It wasn't this stuff where I like your song too, or isn't this a good one? It was, so what do you think the is about? Or what do you think about this chord progression? That sort of thing.
Right.
And let me be clear, there was a lot of hypothesizing. So some of the things we would say were not correct, or they would be tangential, or sometimes border on creative writing. So let's be clear about that. It wasn't this whole factual dissemination, but it was interpretive at times. But we did do this, and so some of
But
the
it was
things.
more than just like Elton looks cute in this picture, or I mean, what's your favorite Elton song? Oh, every song is fantastic. It's Elton. It was more substantial than that.
Generally it was. I mean, occasionally we'd have the thing like Elton hates meatloaf. I think we read he hates eating meatloaf in East End Lights, which is a great magazine, by the way, and that's where most people
loved it.
kept in touch. But that was
Yeah.
one thing. It's kind of a, but and I should point out that we had newsletters, is what we started, email lists and newsletters. So every day for the first 2 or 3 years, I would publish a newsletter on Elton John. I did this for 3 years. Christmas, New Year's. I remember once, a few times I had to travel. I had to figure out how I was going to do it from abroad. And so every day, I mean, I literally put in on average about 15 hours a week on this for a good 4 or 5 years, and kind of trickled down to about 10 hours for another 6 or 7 years. And so it was a lot of labor of love, loved doing it. But a lot of the very first things that were on the internet came from myself and the people we collaborated with. So just a few ideas of things that were firsts that we take for granted was having an email list with an email newsletter about Elton. There was nothing about that. And in fact, somebody who was a freelance writer about 4 or 5 years ago approached me and said they were doing an article on the first dozen or so fan sites and fan organizations on the internet. And he approached me because I was one of those first people, which shocked me.
Yeah.
But then it was true. And so
true.
I made a list for him of things we had done that were first email list dedicated to Elton John. It was actually had the first I should get ahead of myself. It had the first Gopher server, which you never heard of what a Gopher server is, but it was a precursor to a web server. So what a Gopher server was, it had text, and then it also included the ability to look at images, very similar to a web, but it was very primitive. And that was developed by University of Michigan, University of Minnesota. Gopher was their mascot, etc., hence the name Gopher. And then we evolved into the first website developed, dedicated to Elton John and Bernie Taupin. There were no websites. And to put this in perspective, there were no scanned images available of any of Elton John's albums. So today, you want to get a photo of Elton John, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road? I don't know, you go to Amazon, Wikipedia, you copy it, and you're done. There was nothing like that. We had, this is at a mega university with 46,000 students, one of the top research institutions in the world, one of the top 10 computer science institutions in the country. And, we had 3 scanners that could scan things. So I spent a weekend scanning Goodbye Yellow Brick Road artwork and stitching it all together, because the scanner was only the size of a piece of legal paper, and stitching those images together because, it's the back panel and the front panel and the middle panel with the photos is one big continuum. So I spent, probably 3 or 4. Oh, stop this for 1 second. Later, I have let me pause here. Remind me, my computer was about to restart. So let me start over on this, okay?
Yeah.
Never fails, right? I'm waiting for the power outage. So we'll start again.
Okay.
So there were no images of Elton John's albums on the web anywhere, okay, on the internet. If it's not like today where you can go to Wikipedia or go to Amazon and copy an image, or Dave Bodo's great Eltonography site, etc. They weren't there. And so what we had, this large university, we actually had 2 or 3 scanners, if you can imagine that were, well into perhaps upwards of $1,000 a piece. The same scanners you could buy today for probably $40 or less. And I spent a better part of a weekend scanning Goodbye Yellow Brick Road into a scanner, so we'd have those images. And
Wow.
as you know, it's a big triple gatefold that they had for the back cover from the panels. And I had to stitch those images together with Photoshop version 2.0 I was using. I think we're up to, they started counting over. I think we must be up to like Photoshop 25 now. So did all those sorts of things for the first time. And, it was kind of fun for a few years. Those were the images I would encounter. I could recognize my work in a way, but of course it was actually the work of David Larkham and friends, but it's the first time they were on the internet. So those were a first. Uh, Another first we did was uh, for the benefit of people who might be interested, we took the Elton John AIDS Foundation brochure and made an internet version of that because there was nothing on the internet about that. In that case,
Wow.
I printed it out and I sent it to John Scott, who at the time was the head of the Elton John AIDS Foundation in Atlanta. And he sent back a very nice letter appreciating it, saying that's nice to get the word out. And while I don't have the letter in front of me, it was clear he didn't totally understand what the internet was, and understandably so. But it was very, very welcoming, etc.
Which is funny because now they have a major presence on the internet.
Oh,
but
absolutely,
what it
absolutely.
was. And so you basically introduced them to what could be done.
Well, it was a first. I'm not even sure they saw it right away, except for the fact I printed it up,
Yeah.
put it in an envelope, and sent it off. And that's how they know it. And again, I thought it's very nice of them. This day and age, an organization like that probably for legal reasons wouldn't even acknowledge it or would tell me that please don't do that. We have our official website, etc. So,
Right.
so first discography, first Elton John AIDS Foundation website, or information about the about the Elton John AIDS Foundation. First time that we would have where there were auctions, and the New York Times person was telling me, or I shouldn't say New York Times, they were trying to write something for New York Times. I think they were a freelancer, but this person told me that it was innovative that we were taking our Elton John items and auctioning to other people on the internet, the small group of maybe a few hundred people, and we would charge more than they worth to donate the money to the AIDS Foundation, which was unusual. That was not heard of. That was pioneering. Same thing with ticket sales. We had a rule, since we don't profit, you're not allowed to scalp tickets. Tickets had to be your cost only. So your face value plus whatever Ticketmaster sale fees were. And again, we would increase the value, if you wanted to put on extra money for a donation to the EJF, that was great. And so there were those sorts of things, but the whole idea was not for profit, wasn't branding. Now, as things evolved, that kind of fell away. We had to come up with a name because it became apparent that, the official Elton John in this case would probably eventually want to have their own website. And of course, they eventually did. And in fact, probably after Elton changed management in the mid to late 90s, he started changing some of his management. They did approach us and say, make sure it's clear that, you are independent, which we always did, that we were a fan site and did not represent Elton's views or any of the people associated with him or Bernie's. And so there was all of that. But this whole idea of it being a very not-for-profit community for discussion. And I'm probably leaving out a few other things. And I guess that's okay. But it was always where we kept the focus on Elton John and Bernie Taupin as well, of course. And that was the whole thing. It was on the music, that was the music. And as things picked up, we developed this name, the 22nd Row. And I thank whoever came up with the name, of course, a reference to the line from Candle in the Wind and from the true fan in the 22nd Row, so to speak. And that's where that came from. And there were so many pioneers who helped the group. I think of people like Barbara Taylor, Dave Bodo, Paul McLaughlin in Toronto, et cetera, who are new. And more and more people picked it up. I know in the mid 1990s, John Higgins was writing for East End Lights at that time. And he was a lot of fun because he'd call us occasionally, call me, and he would give us a little tip. It was sort of a teaser to go get the next East End Lights, but also tell us some things that he knew that he didn't, so that other people didn't know, which was a lot of fun. And, as things progressed, got bigger and bigger, we reunited with people on AOL, America Online, which was cutting edge at the time. And, over time, it got very big. And of course, today it is what it is. And, you can't even think of this idea of, I never would have expected that we'd manage all our records and our music collection on a computer. And I have to say, the people who pioneered it at that time had no intention of that either. this idea
Right.
that would be for profit. It would simply be an exchange of ideas. And so, yeah, I think those are the interesting points here about this. But
So what I have to say though is that the 22nd rows you've just mentioned was innovative. It was informational. It
yeah,
was fun. It was everything that a true Elton John fan would love in a website, and there was nothing like it. And that's what drew me to it. So uh, today we're going to talk about the 40th anniversary of the Fox.
Mhm.
But again, before we do that, I would like to know, what is your vision as we take the 22nd row from what was then called the internet and nobody knew what that was, now to podcast form? What we're playing off everything you just mentioned, the credibility of what you established in the 22nd row, and we're moving it to a podcast. What is your vision for this podcast? And then I'll tell you mine.
Yeah, well, I think it's I vision this being friends talk sitting around a virtual table, talking about Elton John and Bernie Taupin, and just discussing this and expressing an appreciation. You know, we may not always be factual, but I think we'll try to be factual
We're trying
and
to be.
express, some appreciation for the amount of effort and depth and quality it goes into their music. And so, you and I have our conversation, and we're inviting other people to pull up a chair, so to speak, and sit with us and talk.
That's perfect. You're in Chicago. I'm in Columbus, Ohio, working for the Ohio State University at the two arenas there. We're doing Elton John in April, by the way, postponed from 2 years.
Good.
But I am Gary, the arena guy. You see my logo there. I do
I
a lot of
do.
and so on. And my motto is Gary, the arena guy, is fun and informative, and that is my vision
Good.
as well. Fun. It's not going to be gushing. If you want gushing over Elton and his worst song is better than the best song out there by anybody, you're probably at the wrong spot. We are going to have intelligent conversations on facts and our opinions, and we don't always agree, which is great because that makes for good conversation. But that's my vision for this, and I just think it's going to be fun and informational and constructive in nature. So there might be a song that I just don't like, but you think is great, and I can think of one in particular
All right.
on the road. But so that's a little bit of the history of the 22nd row. This is
Yeah.
the Second Row podcast with Jim McKay, the originator of the 22nd row. I'm Gary, the arena guy, just kind of sitting in and chiming in once in a while, and looking forward to this. So before we get to the 40th anniversary of the Fox, and there's really a lot of great information on that album, let's introduce each other so people listening and viewing know who each of us are. And let's do this in a fun way. I will introduce you without you knowing what I'm going to say, and you me without me knowing what you're going to say.
Okay.
Our perspective of what each of us can bring to the table.
All right.
You want to start or want me to start?
I think you better start. I'm not sure what you're explaining.
Well, like I said earlier, we've been doing this podcast before the term podcast was formed. We've been talking, like you, I don't remember when we started, but I believe it was well before Made in England came out.
Yes.
So I think it was well before 95. And I was searching for Elton John information one day on the internet. And I just gotten my computer at the University of Illinois. So I think on my lunch hour or something, I was doing some searches, and I came across the 22nd row and some other goofy sites, but maybe not even the goofy ones at that time, because like you said, it was very early. But I was really into it. I loved it, and I contributed a little bit here and there. And then I noticed the UIUC, which is University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign .edu, and thought, this guy, Jim McKay, I don't know who he is, but we're in the same town.
Yeah.
Both in Champaign-Urbana. And we both are affiliated with the University of Illinois. So I think I sent you a note. We connected on the phone, and we were talking. And I remember somehow it came up that Cradle of Halos, Bernie Taupin's book. We were talking about it, and you asked me if I had a copy of that. And I said, no, I wish I did, but I don't have a copy of Cradle of Halos. And you said, I've got an extra copy. Let's meet, and I'm going to give you a copy. And that was the beginning of, I don't even want to say how long, because I'm very youthful, but we're probably going on 3 decades of friendship and having these conversations, but personally. So this is the first time we're sharing them. And what I want to say about Jim is that he originated the 22nd row, and I admire his work, and I know so many people do. He's well known in the Elton John world for what he did with the 22nd row. He's respected in the Elton John world, and he will go into the weeds a little deeper than I will on maybe the history of Elton switching record companies and why, and who went out of business and who didn't sign him, and all that stuff.
All the meaning
And he
right there, yes.
might know more about you know, the deep meaning of some of the lyrics, which with Bernie, it's always a great conversation. And he's going to go into the weeds a little bit more than I will. But I come from the other side, and I think we meet somewhere in the middle. So Jim is a great source, as you can tell from the early part of this conversation, being he has a lot of credibility from what he did the 22nd row, and has got great respect within the Elton John world. There you go.
Wow, Gary, that's a lot to live up. I don't know what to say. You had a chance to prepare, and I'm overwhelmed with you're very generous to say is
Well,
putting it
I hope
mildly.
you have something nice to say about me. No, I'm
Well,
just,
of course I do. You've been a dear friend, and we talk about other things which we won't talk about here. But you know, remember the first time I met you, and you called me up, and I have to say I was actually not feeling well. I'll just simply say that.
Oh,
And
really?
you called me
Oh.
up, and I was sleeping, and I woke up on a Saturday afternoon, and this is getting too detailed, but you were very enthusiastic and you were very excited, and I realized you were down the street from me, where I live of all people, down the street.
So
And
funny.
it was great to find you know, a fellow friend who was real and not on the internet, even back then, who liked Elton John. I mean, I did have Dan Blanchard, but you had a
Yeah.
different perspective. I think the thing I appreciate about you, first of all, is your professionalism with relating to all these, you know, you're not just an Elton John freak, you're in the entertainment business,
Yeah.
and you are connected with all these people, and they all like you. They will call you back. I don't think you've offended anybody, you know. And to me, you know, you're the Johnny Carson of Eltondom, in my opinion, you know. And whenever I try to think, what would Gary would think about this? Okay, think like Johnny Carson talking about it. And that's the way I think it. Or Roy Leonard, for those of you who don't know, is a really beloved entertainment radio personality in Chicago. And so that's another person which reminds me of the Fox, we'll get to in a minute. But
Yeah.
you know, just as a media person, you are just if you ever want to be interviewed by someone who still does great interviews, it's Gary. You know,
Wow.
we're not going to talk about you know, what your favorite meatloaf is or whatever, or worse.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
unless you
I
want
don't
to.
care.
Unless you
Yeah.
want to.
Yeah, right. Well, I worked at the University of Illinois Assembly Hall, the 17,000 seat arena, for a long time. And then I left and I did kind of my dream job of having a radio show and interviewed celebrities, and still do.
Mhm.
And Roy Leonard from Chicago was my radio mentor, and he interviewed entertainment and notable people. And he never cared who was sleeping with who was dating to who, you know, just wanted to celebrate careers. So
Mhm.
interviewed Nigel back in 1981. Gosh, about 6 months or so, maybe, or a little bit longer after the Central Park concert. So, and maybe we'll share some of that coming up in a
Yeah.
future. And interviewed some other Elton related people, in addition to just the entertainment world. And now I'm back in Columbus working at two 20,000 seat arenas, and we do shows at the football stadium too. And so presenting concerts and still doing interviews. So there you go. So now you know each other.
Yeah, I think I wish I should have done research. I would just add that you know, you're such good with factual knowledge, statistics about Elton John and Bernie Taupin and music in general. And I tend to be a generalist, is what it is. And so my background in the arts tends to, here's a pattern I notice, and it's more visceral, you know, and not everything I say is, you know, you would definitely correct me on that, and that's a good thing.
Well,
And
that's fine, but I mean, you know, a lot of details on the production end of things and that sort of thing. And also, I have to say that Jim is a great music fan as well, and his tastes I really respect a lot, because it's not only Elton John, it's Steely Dan, it's Joni Mitchell, it's Van Morrison, it's Joe Jackson, and lots of people like that. So we both have a great love for music and entertainment, which sets the foundation for what we are doing here today. And
there
today,
we go.
we're talking about an album that came out in May 1981. 40 years ago, the album The Fox came out, It was Elton's first studio album or first album that on Geffen Records. And in some ways, in my mind, it kind of feels like not really, not as much as Leather Jackets, but in some ways, it's kind of like a bit of a compilation album because it's tracks from the previous album, 2133, and some new stuff, and it's a mixture and a bunch of different writers still. But 40 years ago, this year, the Fox came out. And give me your impression of the Fox album.
And well, you know, I have a similar in that it is a collection of a very eclectic collection of
Yeah,
tracks. And I wasn't sure what to expect. I think there was a lot of excitement because there was a lot of hype about the idea that Elton had joined Geffen Records here in the United States. You know, there wasn't that change in overseas, of course, but here in the United States and Canada, he had switched record labels. I remember the late, I hope this is an appropriate description, gossip columnist or entertainment columnist for the Tribune, Aaron Gold. And
yeah,
he and Roy Leonard were my two big sources of Elton information, you know, at that time,
yeah.
as well as walking to the record store to see if there was a new Elton record out. You know, that's how I did. I was a teenager at the time. Sorry to give away my age. I know you were just in diapers, but
I wasn't even born yet.
right, you weren't even born yet. I know. I remember your dad though, looks just like you. So, that was, I would go every week. I mean, literally for 4 or 5 years, I was always kind of too shy, for lack of a better term, to go and say, is there a new Elton John album coming? I would just walk a mile and a half to Rolling Stone Records in Norwich, Illinois, and
Wow.
see if look in the Elton John category, not see anything, and then walk out and come back next Friday or whatever it was, or Tuesday,
Mm.
whatever the day was. And
Tuesdays, the albums come out.
used to be then. Yeah, I was trying to remember what I think it's still but anyways. Yeah. And so I look forward to it. It's very exciting. I remember Aaron Gold's big thing was that he had signed he had signed Donna Summer, and David Geffen had signed Donna Summer, and he said, and the next big coup, if Geffen pulls it off, is to steal Elton John away from MCA. And
Yes.
obviously he did. And that was very interesting. And so I seem to remember another column he had when he came out that said, well, Elton John certainly proves he hasn't lost his touch. And that's what he said about it. But I didn't quite understand at the time that it was a continuation of 21 at 33, you know, that there were songs all done together and he had done so much material.
Well, let's not
Later.
assume that people watching today even know that. Let's
Yeah, I didn't know it.
that a little bit. Yeah.
I didn't know that. Later became aware of this fact. It was more than several years, over a decade later, I became aware that they were 21 to 33 material, and all the Clive Franks co-produced tracks on the Fox were from roughly the same sessions in 1979. And in fact, the album was submitted to David Geffen, and he said that he didn't like the album, for lack of a better term. He was not
I mean, that made headlines. He kind of did the same thing to
Yeah.
Don Summer as well. And
He
he said
did.
he could go back and record more. And that's why you see on the album the liner notes that was recorded, I believe, in 79 and 80, which were the 21 and 33 tracks.
Yeah.
And then in 1981, well, those were the new tracks.
Right. And so I wasn't aware of that. I just saw that later that there were two producers, which was very interesting, two sets of production.
Yeah.
And that kind of hinted at that. I mean, I saw he was using people from the old album, you know, the previous album, 21 at 33.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was some tension there. And of course, Neil Young was another person who had tension there. There was a lot of
Yeah.
controversy with a lot of the established acts, you know, and of course, I believe Joni Mitchell had some tension with him for a while too.
I think so.
Cut to the chase, it's very clear that David Geffen had a special event 3 or 4 years ago. Joni Mitchell and Elton John were in attendance, and some of the star guests at that event. So clearly, whatever it is, it was bygones are bygones. But it was interesting. And so my first encounter was to hear it was coming out. And the first thing I heard from there, I didn't hear it on the radio. I did walk into a record store, and I purchased the first single, which had Nobody Wins. And of course, the flip side, which was The Fools in Fashion.
Yeah.
And I got this home and played it, and I thought this was something pretty radically new.
Yeah.
I could not name a song or a track by Elton that sounded like these. Okay. It
Right.
was
I
a
agree.
very fresh, new sound. You know, I think some people say all the songs by Elton sound the same, or they're retreads. There's some people who critique him that way. these tracks, there's a lot of innovation on them. I mean, it's still Elton John. You want to hear an Elton John record, you don't want him to sound like the Cars or whatever. It sounded like Elton John, but
Yeah.
nobody win. I mean, one of the things that struck me was this whole thing with Roger Lynn's synth involvement. He was an innovator in the synthesizer, and of course, this was a track produced by Chris Thomas, who was in fact had a friendship with Elton going back to, or at least an acquaintanceship going back to the Royal Academy, and and of course, Chris Thomas had worked with Pink Floyd, Alan Parsons Project, worked on Dark Side of the Moon, I believe.
Pretenders.
He had just had a big hit. And that's the thing about Nobody Wins when it came out, was that when I heard this, this could sit along like Brass in Pocket by the Pretenders. It could sit along. It could have sided was the big hit when it came out was Betty Davis Eyes, by Jim Carnes. This would fit very comfortably. It was very contemporary. It was
They kind of called it techno pop at the time.
Yes. I even noticed that in the Wikipedia entry, they have
that's a bad source. Don't go by Wikipedia.
I know. Oh, I'm not saying it's a fact, but as I noticed subjectively, it was classified. One of the classifications musically was new wave.
Yeah,
I would agree with that.
Kind of for the time.
Yeah, it really was.
In the late 70s, early 80s, we kind of like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So Nobody Wins was really, this is pretty radically cool. It really was. And of course, later I found out the history of it having its French roots. Is originally a different song by Dro, and also there being even a French version that Elton recorded. And so I thought it was really the cat's pajamas. So
yeah, well, I'll tell you that the French version, which I do not know French, so I'm not even going to try to pronounce it. I don't know if you can or not, but that was the version released in France, and so some say Nobody Wins was not a hit in France. If you look at charts, it was, but it was the original French version that he recorded in France.
Right.
Nobody Wins was charted, and we'll get to that in a few minutes, but in several countries. So the Fox was recorded in France and Los Angeles, mostly the 21 to 33 sessions, and then EMI Studios at Abbey Road in London, which is really very cool. And that was some of the new sessions. It followed 21 to 33, it preceded Jump Up. So just so you know where it's at, it's the first Geffen album. And it's kind of, like I kind of said, I think it's kind of a forgotten album in the Elton world. Non-Elton fans don't even know about it. The singles, which again, we will talk about in a few minutes, in addition to Nobody Wins, are pretty much forgotten in the, they don't get much airplay these days. But I feel like it's not really a memorable album for a lot of people, but I've been listening to it a lot over the past few weeks in preparation for this. I think it's really an excellent album, and I think it's underrated. I have to say that it was the first Elton album to not go gold, other than, since the Elton John album. Empty Sky was, we all know that was very early on, and that so Elton John through 21 to 33, every album except Victim of Love went gold. This was the first album not to go gold, which is really fascinating, because you'd think with it being a debut album on a new major label, musical heavyweight like David Geffen, that the promotion would have been so great, and maybe it was, that it would have at least been like some of the other Elton albums where the orders were so great that it would have gone gold, because they base that status on the orders, not necessarily sales. So
yeah,
but it did not go gold, and that listening to it now, I'm surprised by that.
Yeah, I am as well. And the thing I will say is that I do not recall hearing it on the radio at all here in Chicago. I'm third largest radio market in the United States. I don't recall hearing it at all. I read about it. Of course, I bought it as soon as I could, but I never heard it played on the radio. I worked, actually, one of my jobs, job I had at the time was working at a discount retailer. I worked at Kmart, and we had Nobody Wins on the side display. We had the singles, and whenever people would put merchandise in front of it, I'd make sure I'd rotate the stack of singles to the front, but it never really sold even, which was kind of sad. And the one time I heard it in public at the time was simply, I was walking home from work at about 11 o'clock at night. and somebody was blaring it out of their car, which made me feel really good. And but it was really kind of disappointing. I played it to death. In fact, I had to replace the copy, my original copy, because I played it so much. And for me, I did see it as a transitional album. I will say it is one of my 3 favorite albums of the 1980s by Elton. And I think it is his best album since Blue Moves. I really do.
Yeah.
And go ahead. Excuse me.
No, I agree. It's listening to it again.
Mhm.
As I have over the past few weeks. You know, he's got so many albums, you can't listen to them all the time.
No.
So I went back and revisited it, and I just enjoyed it so much. And it is now one of my favorite albums in the post-classics era.
Yeah.
Totally. I mean, it's probably one of my top 3 or 4. You know, probably since, well, in the post-classics era. So I mean, it's really good. And what I like about it a lot is that, and maybe some people disagree with this, but I kind of feel like lately Elton has lost a little bit of his edge. He could
Mhm.
more edginess in his track. A lot of the music is kind of safe, and it's verse, chorus, instrumental break, chorus again, and I felt like the Fox breaking down barriers.
Mhm.
Great arrangement. Nobody wins. I like Fascist Faces, and we'll talk more about it coming up. And some of the other tracks, very well done, and not necessarily following a formula.
Mhm.
You know, some of the instrumentation, the instrumental breaks were not predictable, and
Mhm.
some of it saying this is really good, and this is a little more cutting edge than we've been used to a little bit lately. It's not to say I don't love the recent albums. I do. I'm
Mhm.
big fans of a lot of them, but I just felt like this was a little more edgy in a way, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
And the 21 and 33 was, which I actually like a lot of the tracks on that album too.
Yes.
But overall, as an album, I think this is much stronger.
Yeah, I agree. Artistically, it's a much stronger album, and it's interesting because, as I was saying before, definitely it sounds like an Elton John album, but there are certain elements that are inserted in this that are not just inserted, but are part of it. They're integrated really well. That are there, that are innovative, they're different, and they're not just there tacked on to be different. You know,
Right.
like you know, like with Breaking Down Barriers. That's the introductory track on there. You know, the
That's a
piano
good lead
riff.
in to our running down the track. So
Exactly.
breaking down barriers.
Yeah, Breaking Down Barriers. It opens with that piano riff, and
Yeah.
you know he has lots of piano riffs. He's opened other albums with power rockers, like 21 and 33 opened with Chasing the Crown. You
Chasing
know?
the Crown, a perfect example.
But this riff, you know, it's not contrived. It's definitely different. It is
Yeah.
edgy, maybe a little new wave, but it's a piano. It's not, you know, it's not like playing Sex Pistols guitar or anything like that, you know, or Ramones, but it is new wave, and it's very cool. You know, I really liked it. You know,
I like it. I think it actually could have been a single.
Yeah.
This was one of the Gary Osborne written songs. So he wrote the lyrics, of course. Breaking Barriers. I remember I was working at a radio station at the time when I was in college, and I worked evenings so I could have a little freedom like you hear about in the old days when you didn't have to follow a wheel of you play this song once an hour and this song every other hour and so on and so forth. I played Breaking Down Barriers, and I loved it. I thought it was just a great song and a great opening song written by Gary Osborne and Elton John. The second song on the album on side 1 is Heart in the Right Place, all written lyrics by Gary Osborne.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, well, like these 2 tracks, I thought they go together very well.
Me too.
And one of the things I liked about both these tracks, the guitar playing on there, is it's a really kind of an edgy guitar sound to both of these as well.
Which you don't really hear too much these days. I wish he would add a little. I mean, we were begging for him to get back to piano in his songs, which is great. But I'd love to have Davey or another guitarist, you know, be featured a little bit more in a couple of tracks.
Well, both of these tracks have an edgy guitar, but they play really well with this piano. His piano is also there. They don't.
Exactly.
I will say, if I may add one thing about Breaking Down Barriers, there's this thing in the late 70s, early 80s, which was a fad that did include, which is not something it comes off pretty well, which is this. He does a good job of this, but some other songs, this whole idea of having vocal solos. You know? that was a kind of a trendy thing to do a vocal solo where you kind of, it's not quite scat, but you kind of, make sounds and everything. One that really kind of like, I keep thinking of Olivia Newton-John in Totally Hot in 1978, and she had this opening
Wow.
track, and then she just starts sounding like a monkey with coals in her pants after a while.
See, I told you he'd go deep sometimes. Yeah.
But that was that thing. But both of these tracks were really good, and this is something else about these lyrics, which I liked about all the lyrics on this album, is that I could see Elton not necessarily being autobiographical, but I could see Elton singing these being really genuine about singing these songs. They weren't him acting out for somebody else or pretending to be somebody, Breaking Down Barriers. I can see him being very genuine about singing that. Or Heart in the Right Place. Well, we all know he's had problems with the press, especially in the UK tabloids. So, these seems like real genuine lyrics, regardless of who's writing them,
Right.
And that's what I like about these tracks.
So the next song is the first of only 4 songs on the album written by Bernie Taupin, Just Belgium. We've talked about this a lot. This was a song Elton and Bernie wrote and gave to Rod Stewart, and he turned it down.
Yeah.
And it sounds exactly like 1980s Rod Stewart.
It does. It's really surprising. And I even wonder about that part, where he has the French speaking girl on Just Like Belgium. And of course, I think back to Tonight's the Night, where he has the French speaking. I kind of wonder if that was a little nod or a wink to that.
Maybe it was.
I would think so. This is where I was talking about, I present hypotheses. They're not necessarily factual, but I kind of think it is in my head. So that was one thing that reminded me of that, definitely. And it was a great song. And again, for whatever reason, I think of it being a bit autobiographical. I know it was written for Rod Stewart, but when I first heard it, I think of him with Davey and Nigel and Dee, or at least Dee and Nigel, going on tour in Europe back, a dozen years before or something, or 10 years before, So
it's a good song, Just Like Belgium. And it was a single in Europe and not here in the States. It didn't do anything. Probably not even in Belgium. So
I tried pushing that song on my friends, in fact, and I was like, what kind of song title is Just Like Belgium? In fact, I had a friend who had a horse, and I was trying to convince her for her show name for the horse to call it Just Like Belgium. She didn't bite at all.
She didn't bite. The next song we talked about plenty, Nobody Wins.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to pronounce French names, but Jean-Paul Dru, perhaps.
Dru, yes.
The original song, and Gary Osborne Americanized it with Nobody Wins and the American words to go with that. And we talked plenty about that. Fascist Faces is a song that kicks. I wish Elton would do something like this again. You don't want to recopy everything but this type of the feel, the mood, Fascist Faces, it's a Bernie Taupin written song, obviously with Elton. I love the fact that Reverend James Cleveland and his Cornerstone Baptist Church Choir is on a song called Fascist Faces.
Yeah.
I mean, not even close to being a gospel song.
Right.
But James Cleveland is a legend in gospel music.
Sure.
In fact, he's the first gospel artist to be honored with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
Did not know that.
Yeah, so he comes with a lot of credibility, and that sound on Fascist Faces complements the guitar, the piano, the total arrangement. I think it's a fantastic song, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. It really is great. And the kind of vocal rap at the end, it's something that's sort of cutting edge too. And, again, these are songs I think I could see Elton genuinely performing them. The whole thing, the Red Shoes, I don't know for a fact, but I have this image of like when he went to Russia, or people criticizing for going to Russia, and,
right.
Just like Nobody Wins, I could see him singing that, given his upbringing, the story we know about his life. That's another song. And that's what I think are great about these lyrics. They're all lyrics I think I can really see Elton engaging in,
So side one, Breaking Down Barriers, Heart in the Right Place, Just Like Belgium, Nobody Wins, Fascist Faces, very upbeat. So a lot of them are guitar oriented or very just upbeat songs. No balance on that side. But we begin side two with a couple of instrumentals. Carl Etude, written by Elton John, solo by himself. It's an instrumental, so no surprise there. Followed by Fanfare, which he's joined by the London Symphony Orchestra on both of those, so that's great. And James Newton Howard co-wrote that with him. And talk a little bit about Carl Etude and Fanfare.
Well, I think what's most interesting for me, but the thing about fanfare is, first of all, it reminded me of some of the instrumentals on Blue Moves. First of all,
Yeah,
that
I
was one
agree.
thing. That was the first thing. The other thing is that we had talked about this a little bit before, was that fanfare, that whole synth instrumental, was used for a radio show for a long time, for many years. I think it was a Sunday night, maybe public radio show that had it as its theme song, or at least its song for breaks. And it's interesting how that was kind of mashed together as this whole three-way track between fanfare, Carla Etude, fanfare, and then into Chloe, all
Yeah,
together as one track on some versions of the CD. But it really brought me back to Blue Moves. Really a fan pleaser. All three of these are kind of songs I think people really like, and I have a hard time discussing the three of them separately in a certain way because they do flow together so
they
much.
do. They do.
I will say that I think the weak link of this is I'm not totally, if I think too hard, the lyrics to Chloe are a little weak, in my opinion, it's not. And that's something this guy sounds so horrible and he's begging for forgiveness, but by the end of the song, it's like, Chloe dumped this guy. He's a jerk, What's wrong with you? Get help now.
What you gonna do about me?
Really? What you going to do about her? Get help.
Yeah, that was a Gary Osborne lyric.
Yes.
Chloe was the second of the two singles off the album. And we'll talk about some of the chart positions coming up. Heels of the Wind
Yeah.
was an upbeat song written by Bernie Taupin with Elton. And it's probably a much needed up-tempo song in side two, because side two is way mellower than side one.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was a fun song, and I think it's a
Yeah.
song that could be covered by other people. I can't
I
think
do
of quite
too.
who, but it'd be a good early 80s. I don't know. The first person comes to mind, Strange Left. I wonder what the Bangles would sound like singing that, for example,
Man, they covered Prince. Why not Elton?
Right, for sure.
Yeah. The next one, another song, I think one of three songs, if I'm not mistaken, that Elton co-wrote with Tom Robinson, writing the lyrics, and it's Elton's song. It's funny when you go to other sites and people say, Elton had to write the lyrics because Bernie, Tom Robinson, or somebody, they don't know Elton's life. They can't write about Elton's life. Elton, well, that's just so not true. Elton, when he admits when he writes lyrics, it's kind of Moon and June, and look at Flintstone Boy. But Bernie does know Elton, and it's evidenced by a career of albums and songs they've done together. And Elton's song is one that captures, if it's not totally biographical, it captures the feelings that Elton was going through as presumably as a kid. And it's a very touching song.
Yes.
It's called Elton's Song. Not the most creative title, but maybe Elton called it that because this is my life. This is what I went through, and other people go through this too. Listen to these lyrics, and the lyrics are I think they're very moving.
I agree. And it was such a great song. The first time I heard it, I instantly loved it. I know you, like me, first time we heard it was on the 79 USSA tour.
Yes.
When he played it. And I was so eager for that to come out. And I was so disappointed when it wasn't on 21 at 33.
Yeah.
So there actually had almost 2 years had elapsed between when I first heard it and when we actually had it in our hands to listen on our own. And this is the thing that's very interesting. And let's with Tom Robinson, he's in addition to being a punk icon, he's also an icon in the queer community. That's definitely a fact. I'm sure that's part of the reason he wrote with them. And the three songs that I'm aware of that they did together, we have Sartorial Eloquence, we have
We're Never Gonna
Fall in Love Again, on 2133, and of course Elton's song. This is a guy who knows a certain side of Elton and can write for him, which is the thing that strikes me the most after all these years. These three songs are, clearly written for the side of Elton, which, maybe Bernie wouldn't necessarily connect with quite as much,
Right.
And so I think they're outstanding tracks. I don't know that they could have continued their songwriting partnership. There's all sorts of reasons that I'm not aware of, but I just, for the reasons you say, here's somebody who can write for Elton, and I thought it was really three great tracks indeed.
I think so too. I like Tom Robinson's lyrics, at least the ones that were in collaboration with Elton John. I
Yeah,
very much, and they probably ended as a one-time maybe thing in the 21 at
sure.
33. And you know, Elton was starting to patch things up with Bernie, and maybe that was the main reason.
Yeah.
The final song on the album is probably my least favorite on the album, and it's the name of the album,
Yeah.
the title track,
Yeah.
lyric by Bernie Taupin. So it was kind of nice to end the album with the Bernie Taupin lyric.
Yeah, I agree. I like the song and I don't hate it. It's not my desert island track. I
Yeah.
always kind of viewed it as being a brief update on the state of Captain Fantastic today. Where is he at today? He's the Fox instead of Captain Fantastic, or in addition to that.
Okay.
I like that. Some of the lyrics are a little weak, you know, like it or not, I'm the fox, strong as an ox, you know, a little Moon and June for me at times, you know, but I enjoy the song on it, the whole from beginning to end. I like the harmonica on there, and you know, it's an enjoyable song. It's definitely not a throwaway or excruciating, but it's certainly not my favorite either. But
I think
I
it's a
like
good, yeah, it's a good someone's final song. No, it's not related to that song.
that.
It's a good final song.
It's a good closer. Yeah.
It's a good closer. And what I like about this album too, and I thought about this when I was listening to it, nowadays, kids listening to music, they don't have any concept of what went into, what opened an album, what closed side one, what opened side two, what
Right.
the flow of the songs on side A versus side B. And there was a strategy to that. And I feel like an album, it was done in an expert fashion.
Right.
It was done with, you can see the strategy. This song belongs here. This is a good opener. Side two, great opening with those instrumentals, kind of set the mood of side two. Thought it was very good, and the Fox was a good way to
Yeah. I mean,
it's a great way to start.
yeah, so many of these two-sided albums, it was like act one and act two, you know, we
Right, exactly. That's what I'm
open the
saying.
curtain, draw the curtain, and second act, we start again. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
We are doing the 22nd Row podcast with Jim McKay and Gary, the Arena Guy, having a blast. We're going to talk now about the singles from the album and maybe some of the chart positions. It's kind of an interesting thing. You know, we're talking about how much we enjoy this album in perspective. You know, as time goes by, sometimes an album or some music is appreciated more than maybe it was at the time. I remember I worked in radio at the time at a station that doesn't exist anymore in Normal, Illinois. Which a lot of people laugh at the name of that city, but I went to Illinois State University and I worked at a radio station that nobody listened to. But I was able to do interviews with Neil Sedaka. We talked about Elton, Nigel, the Spinners, Wolfman Jack, Air Supply, all kinds of people like that. And so I was able to do a lot of things. And I ended up forming and strengthening the music department. And I'll never forget the day Nobody Wins showed up.
Yeah.
When a new Elton single came out. Now, know that during this time in 1981, Elton was not as consistent with major hits. I mean, he charted, but with major hits as he was maybe 5 years earlier. So, you know, it was exciting to get the single. It got some airplay because I was music director.
Good. We need that.
But if you ask even new Elton fans nowadays, a lot of them probably don't know the song Nobody Wins because it's not on the compilations or anything. Yeah. And, you know, they're kind of like forgotten singles. Nobody Wins made it, peaked at number 21 in the US on the Hot 100, the pop chart. And it reached 23 on the adult contemporary charts. It was backed by Fools in Fashion, which we talked about, which was a good song. I mean, yeah, probably the album. The next single was Chloe. I don't know what you think, if that was a good second single or not, but Chloe was kind of forgotten almost immediately. It went top 40. It peaked at number 34, pop charts, and number 16 on the adult contemporary charts. So it was a bigger, mellow ballad than it was fitting in with the pop songs of the day. Tortured was the B-side of that song.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So that was it. The album peaked at number 21 in the United States. Didn't really blow people away.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people expected to do better, being a debut album on Geffen, and with all the hype that surrounded it. It may have been hurt a little bit because there was a lot of press on the fact that David Geffen said, "I don't like it, go back and do some more." And I'm wondering if that
Yeah.
hurt a little bit. And when I say that, the public maybe not have known that, but critics probably heard that, and maybe that affected some of what they wrote about, which in turn then affects whether people get excited about it, in addition to the fact that there were some hits, but they weren't major hits. Now, it did better around the world. These are some top 20. It hit top 20 in 5 countries. Number 2 in Australia, always popular in Australia. It hit number 5 in France and Norway, number 6 in New Zealand, number 12 in England, and number 20 on the Dutch album chart. And like I said before, the album did not go gold. It was his first album. If you take out Victim of Love, which someday we may talk about that.
Yeah.
If you take that out, it was his first serious album, regular studio album, that did not go gold, which is kind of unfortunate now as we look back and talk about what a wonderful album was.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate, this is what you demonstrate so well. What's so great about you, Gary, which I admire, is you know all these numbers, you do all your research, and you'd be my lifeline if I was on the Elton John Bernie Taupin edition of Millionaire or whatever those shows are. So yeah, that it is disappointing, the fact that it has not gone gold. And let's reissue it a couple times so we buy 3 or 4 more copies.
Yeah. Yeah. Although I'm not sure it's on the top of the reissue list because
it isn't. No.
So it probably would not sell again. Let's talk about your opinion on some of the B-sides. Fools in Fashion was the flip side or B-side of Nobody Wins. There was another version of Nobody Wins with the French version.
Right.
I'm going to try to pronounce. Just Like Belgium in England was released as a single, not here in the States, but the B-side was Get Over Getting Over Losing You. And Tortured was the B-side of Chloe. And what are your thoughts on the B-sides here on some of these albums?
Well, some of them I like more than others.
I believe they all came from the 21 and 33 sessions.
They did. I mean, so many singles came from that. And just to give an overview here, back in the late 90s, I spoke with Gus Dudgeon and his people about which B-sides should go with which remastered albums if they were ever to expand to the whole collection. Of course, the merger between Polygram and Universal put the kibosh on that for a while. And of course, they eventually did come out without bonus tracks, like the Fox was re-released in 2003, but no bonus tracks. And one of the things we struggled with was this idea is if we put the tracks from all of the 21 to 33 sessions on one collection, it would be 2 or 3 discs. And of course, 21 to 33, granted, just missed going platinum. It's not exactly financially the most feasible album to do that for. It'd be really hard to do that. I mean, Jewel Box is probably the best collection you can get for those tracks.
Right.
And, so it didn't fit. And that's when we decided we would just put the tracks, the B-sides, even though they were from 21 to 33, put them on the albums with which they were released. But I think one that stands out for me is Fools in Fashion stands out for me. It has that harmonica and the clapping, and it's all kind of very different, and
I agree.
In the sense, so it could have been included on the album, in my opinion. That's one I'm not so sure should have been dropped, but it could have made the album, in my opinion. The Je veux de la tendresse.
There we go.
Yeah,
just wait. Yeah. Say that one more time, because I just
not perfect, but Je veux de la tendresse. Yes, and I was like my second year of high school French when that album came out, and so I tried to wave it to my French friends.
I didn't even try it.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure I should have tried it either, but we'll hear from our French constituency if we have any. But be that as it may, what's interesting about that is that there's a break in it where you actually get a whole verse without any lyrics as an instrumental instead. So if you ever play that, you get to hear it strictly as an instrumental, which is kind of fun.
Mm-hmm.
And I Can't Get Over Getting Over Losing You, which I always have to think of, okay, how many times do I say get over? When do I stop? How many measures? And it's a fun country song and cheeky. And, it could have fit very well, actually, Reclaimed for Peachtree Road, for that matter, would have fit on there pretty well. Right after leave, turn the lights out when you leave. Is that kind of country?
I know, and Elton wants a country hit so bad. How many times has he tried?
Yeah.
And Brenda Lee covered Take Me Back and Leave the Lights Out. He did with Dolly Parton on a CMA Awards show.
Yeah.
I feel like there are a couple of country artists that could record that song and have a hit with it. But he's got some examples of some country stuff that you can tell that he would love to have a country hit.
Yeah. Well, the whole Restoration album is a whole tangent on
Yeah,
that. You know, there's some
right,
really
right.
candidates who are very viable and admirable
Yeah.
for that. But yeah, those are the ones that stand out. Those are the ones that I play quite a bit. And but if I had to pick one from all those, I'd probably go with Fools in Fashion. And like I said, there's that novelty about the French version of Nobody Wins. But yeah, it's an underrated album, that's for sure. And I really appreciate listening to it 40 years later. And
Yeah.
is this the part where we get to say where we rank it and so forth? And
No, let's
oh, not
talk
yet.
about. No, we're getting there.
Yeah,
But before we say goodbye, I want to touch on a couple other things, and then
sure.
at the end we both can rank it and
All
maybe
right,
discuss its place in history because I think it does have a place in the Elton John world. But let's touch on the personnel on this album just a little bit.
sure.
Make
Oh yeah.
a bit of a mixture from the 21 to 33 sessions,
Mhm.
and then the Fox,
Sure.
session. They're combined, but Elton John and Clyde Franks produced a lot of the stuff that carried over from 21 to 33. And Chris Thomas, this is the first time that Chris Thomas had any production credits with Elton John.
Mhm.
Chris Thomas produced Breaking Down Barriers, Just Like Belgium, Nobody Wins, Fascist Faces, Heels of the Wind, and the Fox. So he did a bunch of songs, and it began a friendship and a work collaboration that would go on for a while.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, as Bernie says, we basically had two producers. We had Gus
Yeah.
and Chris. Which is
Yeah.
very true. And yeah, I think it brought some freshness, especially in the beginning of their collaboration. And clearly, I mean, he has a reputation that and credibility. I think is unquestionable. Uh, you know, Gus obviously collaborated on his most defining work. But
Yes.
if he's going to bring somebody new in, Chris is definitely the person to bring in. He has an established relationship, so it's not somebody just trying to get somebody together to be different, to see what happens.
Yeah.
At the same time, he definitely was hot, for so long
He
before he
was.
met Elton and when he started working with Elton. So it was really top of the line production. And so I will say, even though it is sort of a collection of different songs that are disjointed, and that's to a certain extent, and yet it does flow together in other ways. It reminds me a lot, for that reason. I've always kind of reminded me a lot of Blue Moves as a follow-up. I'm not saying it's as good as Blue Moves, but the idea had different styles and different appearances by different musicians on different tracks.
And
That
didn't
part,
necessarily always follow a formula. And Blue Moose didn't do that. And
it didn't. It did
and
not.
I like that.
Yeah. And the way side two opens with the instrumental and the orchestra piece, it definitely reminds me of Tonight, theme from a non-existent TV series, your starter for that sort of thing. And the fact that there's some tracks that weren't maybe overtly, not all of them were overtly or literally autobiographical, but did touch on things that Elton could identify with or connect with, I think were really key features of that. Plus, you have Reverend James Cleveland on there, back
There
from
you go.
Boogie Pilgrim. He's back. And just a stupid thing. This is not a fact, but it's always in my mindset. We had Blue Moves, and this is the Lavender album instead of the Blue album.
Oh, there you go.
That was another thing. And
Well, and that came from famed photographer Terry O'Neill, which photographed Elton a lot.
right.
And other great musicians, Terry O'Neill did the cover photo and the artwork for that, made that happen. Want to touch on before we
and the interior design statement too, I'd point out too, as well, from Fat Chance. I mean, these are historic furniture he has on there. It is interesting. He has that picture on the back of Elton with his cowboy hat and with this woman. Who is the woman and why is she there? Is she there to make him look more straight? Is she really significant to him? I don't know. And I've never understood that. It's a mystery to me. I can only hypothesize at this point.
I have no idea. I don't think Elton ever fooled anybody, so I don't know what that is for.
Yeah.
The musicians on it were great. And of course, we're talking about 3 different sessions over 2 albums, but James Newton Howard, Dee Murray, and Nigel.
Yeah.
I love the D's on this album, and Nigel, they performed on it. And then Steve Porcaro and Steve Lukather from Toto. Steve Luther just announced today that no more studio albums from Toto.
Wow.
So I just announced that today, but they're great. Of course, Toto's a makeup of studio musicians that formed a band, and I feel like they always added some
Yeah.
music to some of the Elton tracks as well.
You know, they're very talented, and to think they mostly start between their father, of course, who was a famous as well, and then throw in that they worked with Sonny and Cher as teens. You
Yeah.
know, there's that. It's
Yeah.
fascinating in itself.
That's crazy. And then, of course, the London Symphony Orchestra, which maybe preceded the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, that whole thing, maybe. But them on the track, that was good.
It made me think of Lavender Moves again. You know, my little.
So before we wrap this up, it just occurred to me that we haven't talked about Visions.
Oh yeah.
Do you remember Visions?
Well, actually, no. I do know what it is, but I never actually had the pleasure of watching it but once.
Yeah, and you probably watched it more than anybody else except me.
Okay, I
was watching this today. But Visions was a concept directed by Russell Mulcahy, who is a movie maker and one of the top music video producers of the 80s. And the idea was to come up with basically, instead of a concept album, is a concept video of every song on the album.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't the first, but it was one of the top 2 or 3 concept videos where every song had a video that came out. I think Eat to the Beat by Blondie was the first one. A lot of people, it's like, what was the first? It's like the argument, what was the first rock and roll song? I mean, people argue about it and what, you know. I think Blondie had the first, but Elton may have had the second one with this. And there were videos for all 10 songs of the Fox.
Yeah.
VHS and Laserdisc. And it was really kind of innovative for the time. The problem was it was very Victim of Love-ish in the way that Victim of Love was released after disco was dead.
Yeah.
So it had no relevance, and it came out and people saying, okay, a disco album?
Yeah.
Done with. Why is this out now? Well, Visions came out well after the Fox burned out.
Yeah.
And Elton was done promoting it.
Yeah, I remember, yes.
Out sooner. Maybe it was in production. I don't know. Maybe somebody knows that can correct us, but it came out when even Elton was done with the Fox. It's long out of print. It's never been put out on DVD. I will say that one interesting fact about it is that in England, every track from the Fox was on the video that was released, except Elton's song.
Oh, yes.
But I will tell you why. It's because they recorded the video in a school. They got permission to do it, but the school did not know the content of the song. They thought maybe it was another Rocket Man or something.
Yes.
Or Sorry Seems to Be the Hardest Word of your song. But when they found out the content of the song and what the song was about, they said, you can't put that out.
Yeah.
So England, this was a school talking, England got the version without Elton's song, but everything else, but in the US. But nobody heard about it, didn't hardly sell any copies because it was after the fact, didn't get any promotion. I think an ad for it upstairs because I collect all that stuff. But it was one of those things that was brilliant, but came out after all the excitement. And there wasn't a lot of time, but once it was over.
Well, there's a lot of, I was not aware. I've learned something. I was not aware it came out on VHS. I probably would have sought that out. I thought it was only on Laserdisc. I don't have a Laserdisc format. Great format for your format experts.
I got it on VHS. I need to get it on Laserdisc just because I'm a completist. So, but I haven't on that. So 40 years ago, the Fox came out. As we look back, as we wrap this up here, where do you think the Fox lands in the discography of Elton John? Looking back, I feel like what we think of the album 40 years later is different than maybe what we may have thought of what it was when it came out in 1981. So at the time, where do you think it lands?
All time, I would say I wouldn't put it in the top half of his albums, but I definitely would put it in the middle. And I would say it's definitely one of my 3 favorite 1980s albums. I'll say up front, my others being 21 at 33. Not 21 at 33. The others being Too Low for Zero, as well as Sleeping with the Past. Those are my other 2 favorite 80s albums.
I love both those albums.
And I think the Fox Was not quite as good as Blue Moves, but definitely better than everything else that came since Blue Moves before it. So better than A Single Man, better than Victim of Love, and better than 21 at 33. Definitely innovative. Uh, I wouldn't put it in my top 20 of albums. I maybe put it in my top 25. I
Okay.
think, what does he have, about 40 albums now? I think I've lost track. I used to really keep
Yeah,
track.
it depends on how you count them with
Exactly.
live albums and all that kind of stuff.
Exactly. Exactly.
But, yeah, I didn't look at it like ranking it as far as top 20, top 25, anything like that.
Yeah.
'Cause I didn't think of it that way. But I think it's a solid album. I think it
Yeah.
really,
Oh, absolutely.
I think, yeah, I don't know. I think it's right there with Blue Moves.
Yeah.
I like Sleeping with the Past a lot, and I like Too Low for Zero a lot. And those,
Yeah.
I think Too Low for Zero is probably his best Geffen album.
Yeah.
And but I've really gained more appreciation for it. Of course, I know the album, you do too, but
Yeah.
listening to it multiple times over the past few weeks, I've gained a greater appreciation for it. Just
Yeah.
it, I like the fact that the arrangements are not predictable,
Yeah.
that some are a little edgier than others,
Mhm.
and it just sounds really good. And I kind of long for some of those days where he takes a few more chances with the
Mhm.
arrangements rather than being a little safe.
Mhm.
Felton fans will argue with me about that, but but I kind of feel like Wonderful Crazy Night, some of those albums are a little bit safe with the arrangements and things, and kind of,
Yeah.
I kind of wish there was a little edge.
Yeah.
Even like Benny and the Jets was edgy at the time. There's no song like it. You know, I wish he'd kind of try something like that. I think the songs like Fascist Faces and things and Breaking Down Barriers are outstanding and they're highlights. of
Yeah.
the
I thought
And-
the whole,
No, I
I
was just saying.
well, I thought the whole album was very innovative as well. And that was my thing. I thought it broke some new ground. It definitely, you have to make it sound like an Elton John album or it's not going to sound like an
Right.
Elton John album. You know, there was a few, but McCartney 2 was an album that came out around then and it was
Yeah.
trying to be innovative. And it was just
Yeah.
like, I'm sorry, it just did not cut it for me, you know,
Right.
you know, I get crazy because people complain about 1976 and they said, "Oh, Don't Go Breaking My Heart started the punk revolution." I said, "Come on, what should have started the punk revolution was silly love songs, because that's what it was a silly love song." But I digress. But I thought it was a great. I'm glad we don't have to rank these albums then, because it's like there's too much. I have to do calculus, you know, and
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, and ANOVA statistics because there's so many issues. But yeah, I think it was his best album since Blue Moves, and I don't think Jump Up was as good, and a few others in the '80s were not as good as that. And I really do feel like he was trying to pick up where Blue Moves left off, or at least it did in terms of quality, innovation, uh, freshness. As I said before, there's just things, you know, a lot of those tracks don't sound like other tracks on an Elton John album, you know?
They stand the test of time. They don't
They
sound
do.
like oldies. They don't
do.
sound like oldies. And Jump Up, oddly enough, did go gold, maybe even platinum, but also it came after Empty Garden came out, which may have had an emotional aspect to it. And Blue Eyes were two kind of
The Blue Eyes, very safe, lovable hit for
It was very
yeah.
safe and
And
lovable.
so,
Very nice one.
yeah, I love it, and it's a great album, and it's just, if anything, is like you said, why didn't this do better? You know, it was a
Yeah.
great artistic and commercial. It was as well, and
I think it was a solid top 40 or top 20 hit song away from being a hit album.
yeah, yeah,
Had that one mega hit on there, it would have done better because as an album, it was really good, but there was nothing on there for the non-Elton John fans to say, "Hey, I want to get that song and get this album." You know what I mean? So
yeah. That's true. Look at Little Genie. Little Genie put 21 at 33 over the top, and I think it was a better album than 21 at 33. But Little
Yeah.
Genie, number 2, I think it was a number 2, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, I believe it was number 3.
Number 3, exactly. Okay, exactly. It says. So it put it over the top, and yeah, it is a fans album, though. You know,
Yeah.
So definitely.
So I can't believe it's been 40 years. This is our first 22nd Row podcast with Jim McKay and Gary the Arena Guy, who's look at my logo, if you forget.
Right.
So before we say goodbye, one thing we want to do is my voice cracks. One thing we want to do in the future is answer questions or answer communication from Elton John fans. So we want to encourage fans, if you have any questions, we may not know all the answers, but we will find out, or I feel we could take calls now if we were Larry King, and we could have
Right.
fans. And so contact us,
Yes.
and we will include you in future podcasts, your questions or your comments.
All right. And shall I put the address at the bottom of the screen or announce it or both?
Well, you know what? This is so new that I don't know how to contact us.
Well,
So
I will prepare an email address and put it at the bottom of the screen and edit it in or include it in the comments for this video or podcast.
yeah.
Okay.
So let's encourage people contributing to this podcast as well, because we would love to get input.
Mhm.
You might say, Jim, you're right on target. Arena guy, where are you? I don't, what? So we don't care. Share your opinion, and we'd love to hear from you. And Jim, today, this has been absolutely
It really has been great. It's been great. It's a learning experience too. And I think we'll just go get better from here. So,
Yeah. So look for the next one. We'll be doing this on a regular basis. We'll have a theme for each show. Next time, we won't have the lengthy background of who we are,
Right.
and we go right into the albums. But I felt like that was important, so people knew who we were, and that actually we have a little credibility. And if you want to know what's going on in the entertainment business in Columbus, you can follow the Arena Guy on Facebook.
Arena Guy on Facebook. I follow it all the time. It's the same quality of discussion, but about everything else in the world, right? I always hoped you'd become a host on Entertainment Tonight, but you know.
Oh, but then I'd have to talk about who was sleeping with who. I have no interest.
All right.
All right, Jim. This was fantastic.
Thank you,
the
Gary.
Founder of the 22nd Row, now in podcast form. Jim, it's been fantastic, and I can't wait till next time.
Thank you. And I can't wait till next time with you. Well, thank you for everything, Gary. It's really your idea to get going. So thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. We'll see you guys next time.
Bye-bye.
Questions and comments can be emailed to podcast@the22ndrow.com. That's PODCAST @THE22NDROW.com. Thank you. This podcast was recorded on June 28, 2021, and is copyright 2021 by Gary O'Brien and Jim McKay. All rights reserved.